In 1483, the heir to the throne of England, 12-year-old Edward, and his younger brother Richard vanish inside the Tower of London. It's commonly assumed they've been murdered. An event that changes the course of British monarchy. Their uncle, Richard III, has always been singled out for the crime, killing the boys to usurp the throne. But a modern investigation into the case now throws this long-held judgment into doubt, exposing the motives of two other leading suspects in an attempt to reveal who the most likely villain really is. We open the mystery files on the royal murder. The disappearance of the two sons of Edward IV, successors to his throne, is the most infamous unsolved mystery in British royal history. Since his death, King Richard III has been accused of their murders and vilified by the monarchs who succeeded him. Even William Shakespeare immortalizes Richard as a deformed usurper, seizing the crown of England amidst an ocean of blood, including that of his nephews. But modern historians contest that this portrayal is riddled with inaccuracies. Richard's life is in fact well documented. The loyal brother of Edward IV, the young prince's father, is entrusted with their guardianship when Edward dies. At the time, Richard is widely considered to be the best man to run the country until the boys come of age. He is not a crippled hunchback, nor is he the only man who could have the boys' blood on his hands. Finally, allowing Richard III the hearing he never had, can he now be exonerated after 500 years of propaganda? In 1483, Richard puts the boys in the Tower of London. Historian Professor A.J. Pollard thinks the prince's imprisonment does not prove Richard's guilt.
Moving to the Tower was not necessarily sinister because it was where the coronation procession started from. It was a big royal palace, a royal residence. It's only later, and maybe largely because of what happened to the two boys, that we now associate it with a prison where people are executed or murdered.
There's no disputing Richard wanted the crown, and his method of taking it is questionable. Sometime in June 1483, it's announced that the boys are illegitimate, on the grounds their father, the dead king, was betrothed to another woman before marrying their mother. Under Catholic law of the day, the princes are therefore bastards, and Richard the rightful heir. Parliament upholds the claim, and in an act known as the Titulus Regius, they legally award the crown to Richard. His critics accuse him of engineering the proclamation. Historians argue that does not necessarily make him a murderer. Dr. Michael Jones is an expert on the mystery of the princes in the Tower.
Once Richard has taken the throne, in a strictly legal sense, the princes in the Tower are no longer a threat to him, because as bastards, they have become irrelevant to the succession.
Claims that Richard murdered the princes are based on rumours that while visiting his northern estates, less than a month into his reign, the boys simply vanish. But published accounts accusing Richard don't start to appear until about 50 years after his death. Sir Thomas More, a statesman and lawyer, formulates the charge in his book, The History of Richard III. Linda Pigeon is an expert on British royal history. She has studied More's chronicle in depth.
Thomas More's creating an elaborate story that Richard wanted the princes killed, and someone says, oh, well, I know the person that will help you.
The prospective assassin is one Sir James Tyrrell, Richard's loyal servant. According to Thomas More, Tyrrell and two of his henchmen murder Edward's sons while they sleep. This is the plot Shakespeare later echoes.
They then remove the bodies, and they're then buried beneath the staircase.
More's story condemns Richard. At Eton College Library, Dr. Julian Luxford has discovered a document which also appears to associate Richard with the prince's death.
The poem says that Richard III wasted the stores of wealth that his predecessor Edward IV had built up, and that he suppressed the soberlays, the offspring of Edward IV.
The verses date to about 1485, just after Richard's death. But experts debate the interpretation of the word opprimere, which translates as suppress.
This word suppress, the ambiguity surrounding that is simply the same ambiguity that exists in modern English, and that is that it can mean anything from, rather mild form of treatment to murder.
And even though the poem defames Richard, it falls short of accusing him of murder. Another clue in the defense of Richard III and the royal murders comes from a chance discovery made inside the Tower of London. During renovations in 1674, workmen find two small skeletons. Just like in the story recorded by Thomas More, they're buried beneath a staircase. Today, a plaque marks the location where the remains were found. But historians have questioned whether the bones are really those of the two royal princes. For a start, Linda Pigeon thinks More's location is fundamentally flawed.
Digging up a stone staircase would take a number of workmen, a number of weeks. It's not something you would do overnight. And at the foot, you're talking about going into foundations as well.
Crucially, there is also no conclusive proof of whom the bones actually belong to.
We're unclear of the sex of the children. We cannot date the ages as precisely as was claimed. And really, it's still open whether they are, in fact, the princes or not.
If the bones are the two young princes, it supports More's allegations. But the current royal family refuses to allow any tests to be carried out. Ongoing work aims to identify the skeletons. But until links are established between the bodies and Richard III, there is little more than speculation connecting him to the prince's deaths. Despite centuries of recrimination, the case against Richard is surprisingly weak. Further investigation reveals there are other possible culprits. The first man worthy of closer scrutiny is the Duke of Buckingham. Peter O'Donoghue is the custodian of some of England's most precious manuscripts.
What I've got here is an annals written by, we think, a London merchant, a London citizen, year by year, an entry made each year. Under 1482-3, which it says, this year, King Edward IV's sons were put to death in the Tower of London by the vice of the Duke of Buckingham.
This document is one of the few surviving accounts of what apparently happens the year the princes disappear. It clearly blames Buckingham.
This is the earliest account we have of what London citizens were saying.
When Richard succeeds the throne, Buckingham grabs his coattails and becomes the second most powerful man in the country. He is one of the very few people with access to the princes. Birdfields is a lawyer and historian who has investigated all the suspects in the case.
Duke of Buckingham, who was the first peer of the land, was a unstable, mean kind of guy. Very selfish. I believe that he resented Richard, and resented Richard being the king because Buckingham had a good claim to the throne himself.
As Richard's right-hand man, Buckingham is always at his side. But when Richard first visits Oxford soon after his coronation, Buckingham is not listed as a member of the royal party. If Buckingham had stayed in London, getting to the princes would be easy. With the boys out of the way, Buckingham is a huge step closer to the throne, especially if he now implicates Richard.
The theory of Buckingham's guilt would be he kills the princes, blames it on Richard to destroy Richard for being a murderer. I think that's a very realistic possibility given Buckingham's neurotic, unstable character.
If Buckingham did kill the princes, Richard is almost certain to have confronted him. The two men hold a meeting. What is said is a mystery. But soon afterwards, Buckingham makes his move. He betrays the king.
I suspect that he was planning to take the throne himself.
For Buckingham to depose Richard, he needs support. He turns to the man experts believe is the other possible suspect in the murder of the princes in the Tower, Henry Tudor, later to become King Henry VII.
Henry had a very, very thin claim to the throne. It really was no claim at all that I can see.
Henry descends from a female line that had been barred from succession.
So he has this very, very thin claim, but he's got a lot of power.
Henry belongs to one of the most influential families in England and can raise an army quickly. His own desire for the crown is the reason he backs Buckingham's rebellion. The uprising fails. Richard orders Buckingham executed. Henry escapes to fight another day, and 2 years later he challenges and defeats Richard in an epic encounter. The Battle of Bosworth Field is won by politics, not bravery. Once again, Richard is double-crossed. His ally, the Earl of Northumberland, turns traitor, pulling his men away and leaving Richard outnumbered. Henry claims the opposition to Richard is because he murdered the young princes. The people's reaction when the king falls, suggests many of his subjects don't believe Henry's story.
Richard was beloved, particularly in the northern part of England. Northumberland had betrayed him in the battle, and when Northumberland went back to his estates in the north, he was murdered by the people who really felt that this was something they couldn't live with, the fact that he had betrayed their hero.
With Richard dead, Henry grabs the throne and becomes King Henry VII, first of the Tudor monarchs. He had already bolstered his royal pedigree by promising to marry the prince's sister. But ironically, by making her his queen, Henry reaffirms the boys' right to the crown by revoking their illegitimacy.
If they're illegitimate, his wife is illegitimate. And if his wife is illegitimate, he really isn't really the king. So what recourse does he have if they're alive? He has to kill them.
Now the victorious king, Henry has complete control of the Tower of London. His men would have no problem eliminating 2 teenage boys. Ruthless, Henry imprisons and kills people throughout his reign, including the prince's 10-year-old cousin and members of his own family. And once he's ensured the future of the Tudor dynasty, he starts to rewrite its history by destroying documents.
Now, the first thing that happens is that the titulus regius is suppressed.
The Titulus Regius is the parliamentary act which details the 2 young princes' illegitimacy and so established Richard's right to the crown.
Politically, he had to get rid of this annoying document because it defamed, it slandered his would-be queen.
Destroying the Titulus Regius, Henry not only clears his wife's name, but relegates Richard to a usurper, and inadvertently creates the perfect scapegoat for the prince's murder.
It creates an effect which is magnified over time, that Richard III had no grounds whatsoever for claiming the throne of England. And that, of course, is the distortion that grows.
Future Tudor monarchs continue the anti-Richard campaign, and in the reign of Elizabeth I, Henry's granddaughter, Shakespeare slanders him as a child-murdering hunchback. But historians now argue the portrayal of Richard III as an evil monster is a gross misrepresentation.
Richard is being deformed in both character and also physical appearance. And of course, one is supposed to mirror the other.
The fact that the entire line of Tudor monarchs maligns Richard is reason enough to question the long-held view that he is the murderer. Despite Tudor claims, there is no proof that Richard had the boys killed. From the evidence, Henry and Buckingham seem as open to suspicion. After Richard's death, 2 uprisings occur, led by people claiming to be the princes back from exile. The first is known as the Lambert-Simnel Rebellion. Rumours surface that the princes have returned. By the time Henry crushes the revolt, there is no sign of either of the boys. But a second invasion, 8 years later, rocks the Tudor monarchy to its core.
Around 1490, we have someone turning up at the court of Burgundy who now claims to be the younger of the princes in the Tower, Richard, Duke of York.
Henry denounces this man as a commoner called Perkin Warbeck, not Prince Richard. Many don't believe him.
This pretender, if he is a pretender, and this series of plots and uprisings is the real deal.
Perkin Warbeck, whoever he is, attracts a stellar cast of supporters. Richard III's sister Margaret, Charles VIII of France, the King of Scotland, and the Holy Roman Emperor all rally around him.
And then there is the at-home support. Most worrying for Henry VII, his own chamberlain, Sir William Stanley.
Stanley is overheard remarking that if Warbeck is Prince Richard, he would ally with him.
Those words are enough to get Sir William Stanley on the block. That's dangerously close to home.
Warbeck's cause creates huge problems for Henry, but in 1497, as he's mounting an invasion into Cornwall on England's south coast, he's captured and taken to the Tower. Eventually, he confesses that he isn't one of the princes.
There are so many holes in the confession that it's almost like he was sending a message. I am not really Perkin Warbeck, the name that they gave him. And I think he's saying, I'm the younger prince.
What is certain is that Henry tortures and executes his prisoner. And with his death, the invasions stop.
I think we have to take seriously the fact that Perkin Warbeck may indeed have been who he said he was. That is, the younger of the two princes in the Tower, Richard, Duke of York, rightful claimant to the throne, and therefore King Richard IV of England.
Many people have been accused of the royal murder of the princes. The much maligned Richard III has been proclaimed guilty without trial, but Henry Tudor and the treacherous Duke of Buckingham are just as likely to be responsible. Unless new evidence comes to light, there is no way of knowing who murdered the boys. But if, as some experts believe, the princes escaped, and Perkin Warbeck, the young Richard, returns to claim his crown, it is Henry Tudor who kills him, after all.